everyone, it's Miriam with a Y. Let's do something representational today with alcohol ink. I'm loving the new Piñata pink, so I'd like to use it for the focal point. I have an affinity for bonsai trees, and they're my inspiration today. That and trees that can grow with seemingly no visible soil in the unlikeliest of places. My goal is a pink flowering tree growing on a cliffside. I don't have a plan for the background yet. I'm going to let that develop as we go. These are the colors I've pulled out. I may or may not use them all, but I like to have them all handy. I have Blanco Blanco, Shadow Gray, Burro Brown, Coral, Pink, Chili Pepper, Baja Blue, Lime Green, and Forest Green. I'm working on a piece of GRAFIX opaque white plastic and starting out by putting a couple of drops of Baja Blue down and a teeny amount of Shadow Gray. With some 99% alcohol, I'm going to spread this out to start my sky. What I love about GRAFIX plastic is that I don't have to worry about those initial drops of ink leaving any stains behind, as they would on most other surfaces that we use for alcohol ink. That gives me a lot of freedom to drop ink anywhere and thin it as I go. With the sky color down, I pull out a regular cosmetic sponge, wet with some alcohol, in order to make some clouds. I like using these sponges because I can cut them to shape if needed, and they don't leave any fibers behind. They're pretty lint-free, and I can also reuse them if I want to. Next, with a water brush filled instead with isopropyl alcohol, I make way for my cliffside. I add a couple of drops of Shadow Gray to my palette and begin the work of building a little mountainside. Luckily, a brush is a lot easier to use than a chisel. The other good thing is that it's hard to make a mistake here. I just have to make lots of jagged lines and, some shading here and there, and bingo bango, we'll have a mountain. I'm choosing to keep this cliff very light in color so that the tree will really pop. Now, if you want a darker hillside, just add maybe some brown or some black to darken up your gray and thin it less than I'm doing here. So keep it more straight out of the bottle than adding a lot of alcohol. With a fair amount of the cliff put in, I lightly sketch in where I'd like to position my tree. I'm using just a regular mechanical pencil and making lines that are so light that I'll be able to leave them in. Next step is mapping out the pink flowers of the tree. And for that, I'm using the corner of my cosmetic sponge again, wet with Piñata pink. And I'm just dabbing at my painting, just putting some spots down, sort of in the pattern of the top of the tree. Like I said, these sponges are easy to cut, so I can vary the shape of the spots by cutting a new end. My goal here is to just get a good block of color in the rough shape that I'm after. Doing it this way also gives me the beginning of the texture I'll want to suggest a tree full of flowers. So if I'd spread this ink out with a brush, I wouldn't have gotten this look. After some straight pink, I add some white to the sponge. It's going to blend with the pink already there and then give me a new shade of, well, no, technically a tint of pink. When you add black, you make a shade. When you add white, you make a tint. Okay, that's your art fact for the day. With a good understanding of my bloom placement, I clear a path for my tree. just so my brown doesn't have to mix with the blue. The gray would be fine for it to mix with the brown, but it's so easy to wipe it away that I might as well take it out too. Now I can use a micro brush or fine point regular brush to paint in my trunk, the branches, and the clinging roots that I'm going to want to put to sort of attach the tree to the mountain. I decide to use both. When you see my paintbrush, you'll see a band with brown stripes on it. This is my tip for you today. These fine point brushes are really cheap, so I dedicate one to each color family. So like one for reds, one for blues, browns, greens, etc. So I never have to go nuts trying to clean these little things. I just label each one with a different colored band so I know which brush is which. My color for the tree will be Burro Brown. At first I'm using it straight from the bottle, so it's not thinned at all. I want it full strength at first as I start the trunk. Some of the branches and those fun roots clinging to the rocks. After a bit, I add some white to my brush and the palette. Now this is going to lighten my brown, and it's also going to make the ink less likely to bloom because the white doesn't bloom much at all. So that's going to let me mess around adding texture to the tree all I want without having to worry about it getting away from me. I then add some white to the palette, and using a new micro brush, I dab white all over the pink to improve the texture, to suggest like individual blooms. The white will always take on the color beneath it in the painting, so I don't need to add pink to it until I want to darken it up a bit later. For now, it'll become pink on its own by absorbing the pink beneath it. I thoroughly enjoy this little dotting process. I can almost understand the appeal of dot painting, though I don't know if I could do a whole canvas this way. People who do that blow my mind. I don't know. Could you do a whole canvas this way? Tell me in the comments. And take a moment to subscribe and click the bell for more tutorials and fun. I stop flowers for a moment to add in a few branches here and there in the canopy of the tree. It's a little detail, but I think it adds a lot. It really sort of brings the tree to life. This is easiest done with a paintbrush or a fine point marker if you prefer. Now some white and pink mix for a few more blooms. And I'm happy with my tree. I paint in a shadow and a few more cliff details. Let's work on the background. I've decided to keep it simple and paint in some water. Maybe it's a large lake or the sea, but it means I'm going to need a level horizon. So I'll use a piece of blue tape and position it above where I'd like that horizon. If I want little to no bleeding, I would press down firmly on the tape, but for this I don't mind some bleeding since I'm going to be putting in a bit of land at the horizon. The tape is here to prevent excessive bleeding into the sky, not necessarily all of it. Oh, and by the way, the tape won't pull up your ink. I've pulled out Piñata Sapphire Blue for this body of water, and I'm putting it in with a water brush. Since I have a mostly smooth sky, I don't want still, flat water too. So to give the water the texture that I'm looking for, I'm just flicking the water brush for quick, short strokes. And then I'm letting the ink do the rest by making it sort of little borders that alcohol ink loves to do. Okay, let's take off the tape. And yep, there's some bleeding. It's kind of cool looking, actually. I was very tempted to keep it. It didn't really fit with this, but yeah, I think it's very cool looking. I mixed some gray with my sapphire to get a new color for my small land masses. My goal is to keep the color palette on this side simple so as not to distract from the tree. While deciding how I want to finish off the water, I decide to address a spot in the painting that's been driving me nuts. Right up here where the blue of the sky meets the cliffside. It looks too artificial and sharp, so I think at this point that a cloud could really help. I end up loving that cloud. And I was really happy when, on her own, my mom mentioned liking it too. It's the little things. Speaking of which, I had just a few little plants growing out of the cracks in the cliff for little extra moments of color. I use lime green and a paintbrush for the foliage, and then piñata coral on a micro brush for tiny little blooms. If you're enjoying this video, please let me know with a thumbs up so I know to make more. We are now in the home stretch. For a bit of fun interest, I add in a couple of birds using a common ultrafine Sharpie. At first 2 birds, then 3. And I look them over and decide they're darker than everything in this painting. And I don't know, they're a bit meh. So let's give them a little more, since that side of the painting is fairly simple and not too busy anyway. Enhancing the birds is pretty easy to do with a white Posca pen and just a regular pencil. So for that, I'm going to paint over the birds with the white pen, but leave the tips of the wings black. Then, with a pencil, I'm going to lightly border the bottom of the birds and add hints of shading. And voila, seagulls. And with that, I think it's time to look this over before calling it done. What do you think? I like the quiet of the right side versus the bright pop of the left. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you have added something else? Or put in less? I'd love to know. Links for everything I use can be found below, and using any link when you do some shopping is an awesome way to help my channel continue. I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. Let your creative nature shine this week. See you soon. Bye now.